My name is Josh Schwartz. I'm here today to talk to you about the benefits of doing crime. Because if you do crime for the right reasons, in the right way, crime really does pay. Now, my role is the villain. I get paid not to build things, but to break them. I plot destruction. I promote propaganda. I incite chaos. I lie to people. I crack passwords. I infect computers. I pick locks. I steal information. I scam. I cheat. I bypass. I'm a hacker, and I'm in the business of creating catastrophic failures. But I'm lucky enough to get paid a nice salary by a nice company with good intentions. But I'm paid to make extremely not nice things happen to that same company that pays my salary. This industry is known as offensive security, and we get paid to do crime because instead of making off with the loot, we tell the story of what really happened. We teach our victims so that they can get better at fighting the real bad guys. I still go to meetings, I set my OKRs, I produce metrics, I make presentations to the board. Believe it or not, this is actually a real job. I think the reason this is a real job is because 100% secure, although you may have seen it, you may have heard it, it's a lie. It would be nice, but trust me, there is no such thing. There is no guarantee for security, as it applies to both companies out in the world and each and every one of you sitting here. It's something that you kind of just feel. You feel secure. And being told that your security, your safety, your privacy is guaranteed is really only true and really only believable until it's not. For instance, there was no guarantee that your flight here wouldn't crash land. And there was no guarantee that you won't be mugged on your way here or on your way home tonight. And there's no guarantee that your home isn't being burglarized right now. There's really no guarantee that you're safe even sitting in this room. It's going to be always possible for terrible things to happen, for you to lose the things that you care most about. It's possible that your greatest fear is only seconds away and you have no idea. However, even though there's a lot of Batman in this, I'm not a super huge Batman fan. I like Batman, but I am a giant fan of having a theme, so you just get used to it, okay? So there's no guarantee of security, right? And you should not, and you likely do not, live in a state of constant terror, where you're teetering on this precipice of fatality and grief. Most days you actually feel quite secure. You feel fine. You feel secure right now, right? Nothing bad is happening. This is likely for one of two reasons. Either one, you threat model appropriately. And threat modeling is sort of a technique we use in the security industry to kind of assess risk. I'll talk about it more. The other reason is maybe you fall for something we call security theater. And essentially, you'll continue to feel secure until either one of these two things stop working. So let's talk about threat modeling. This is essentially your semi-automatic risk decision-making engine. It's simply the act of going out, identifying what you care about, whether it's your personal safety or some information somewhere, doesn't really matter. But then you're going to enumerate the possible dangers to that thing. And then you're going to try and estimate the likelihood of those bad things happening. And then based on that, you're going to decide or not to take certain actions to try and make things secure. This is essentially what threat modeling boils down to. And this could be a very complex pen and paper exercise, and it often is. But most of you do this every day without even thinking of it. So like when you left your house today, can I get a show of hands? Who locked their front door on their way out? Okay, not everybody. Cool. We're talking to you later. No, and maybe you have like an extra lock, like a deadbolt or something. And then you had to decide, am I going to lock the deadbolt too or not today? And maybe you decided or not to buy a home security system. And then you needed to decide to arm it, or maybe it arms automatically and you don't have to worry about that anymore. The thing is, most of you have something like this, right? And depending on where you live, how you feel about your neighborhood, how you feel about the valuables you have inside, what you need to protect, how you feel about things that might be protecting you that are outside of your control. Maybe based on what you watched on the news this morning, you're going to make decisions, and you're going to take actions that you deem appropriate so that you feel secure. So maintaining this sense of security comes down to this very simple kind of equation. Essentially, there's the threats you understand, the dangers that you understand out in the world, minus your care and effort and energy, or the perceived energy of the things around you that are protecting you from them. If this stays positive, you will feel secure. If this equation ever turns into a negative number, you suddenly will not, because suddenly the dangers that you perceive around you will be greater than what you think your effort and the environment is protecting you from them. And maybe something bad will happen and maybe not. So there's a problem with this, of course, right? Because our view of the world around us is quite limited. There's just the threats you think you understand. And the equation really is the care and effort you'd put into maybe be protected from them. So security essentially just ends up failing. You only notice it when it fails. When it's working, everything's normal, everything's fine. So maybe if this happens and security fails for you, you get a second chance. You get to adjust, you get to improve, and that failure is something you can learn from. Or maybe it's just game over for you or for your company or your bank account or whatever it is. This is still the best case scenario. What's worse actually is option 2, this thing we call security theater. And I'll describe it quickly. It's like the security efforts that you can see, the things that make you feel safe, even though they're typically ineffective at whatever their intention is. Now, it's common for people, once they learn of this word, security theater, to start labeling everything with it. We've seen it in the security industry a lot. Anything that's imperfect security, we start going, oh, that's just security theater, it fails. So let's look at an example so we can tell the difference. I fly around a lot, and this is a photo of the outside of the door of a restroom on an airplane. Now, this is a form of security, right? There's a lock on it on the inside. A little thing switches from green to red, says, hey, someone's inside here. Now, if you're curious enough, you might ask yourself, well, what happens if something bad happens inside the restroom? Like airplanes, right? I mean, what if I go into the restroom and I start smoking 20 cigarettes? They're going to need a way to get in, right? So of course, if you lift up that little plate on the outside, there's a semi-secret, not-so-secret access to the lock mechanism inside. Now, this shouldn't be like groundbreaking for you. Maybe you just didn't realize it was there. Maybe you did know this all along. But like most public restrooms have some form to unlock the lock from the outside, whether it's with a penny or a paperclip, something like that. Now, this isn't security theater. This is an appropriate threat model. You're just really locking the door as a courtesy to let other people know that you're inside there. And just because it's a lock doesn't mean you're safe in the bathroom and it's protecting you from anyone coming in. But understanding this is important. Security theater is more like something like this. Ben Affleck getting patted down by TSA. Is this actually protecting us from anything? These enhanced security screenings at airports is the first thing that most security professionals think of when we hear security theater. So even though we've put a ton of effort into this, it's actually fairly ineffective at the thing that it's trying to do. From 2017 onward, there was red teams that said, okay, let's see if we can bring things forward, bring weapons, bring fake explosives through the security checkpoints, and let's see how much gets caught. And actually what ends up happening is they only catch about somewhere between 10 and 30%, meaning around 70% or upwards get through. And it's sort of like the one thing this is trying to do, right? But it makes you feel safe because you can see it. And let's also ignore the fact that there's been some other research done that means like once you get past this, there's plenty of things that you can buy on the other side to make explosives and to make weapons. So this really isn't actually effective at what it's trying to do, right? So rather than droning on and complaining about this failure, it might be a little bit more interesting to think about why does this happen? How do we end up with this? And an explanation can be found in something called the black swan theory. And if you're thinking of the ballerina movie, it's not that. It's not this. It has nothing to do with ballerinas. I'll wait so you can get a picture. That's a good one, right? Yeah, okay. Wait for you too. All right. So, black swan theory. What I'm talking about actually is a book by Nassim Nicholas Taleb. And in this book, among other things, he says that there are some things out there, events that happen, which we consider to be highly improbable, that eventually occur, and then afterwards we rationalize that with the benefit of hindsight as if it could have been expected. And then we change our behaviors because we now think that this thing is way more likely to happen than it really is. So the formula kind of goes like this. Rare surprise event, think the attack on 9/11, right? Unknown probability. It's not possible to really know how likely that was to happen. It's not possible to go back and calculate that. And it's not possible to calculate, could someone do this again? How many people are intending to do it? It's just, you really just don't know. It was a random chance, a thing happened. And then what happens afterwards is we develop a systemic cognitive bias. At an individual level and at an organizational level, we all start feeling like this thing is really, really likely. And we start making actions and choices based on this newfound information. We design entire security systems just trying to stop small weapons and bombs from getting through the checkpoint. And that's okay, right? I'm not saying that we shouldn't screen and we shouldn't have these security screenings. They do have some effect. But what's important is that we actually test how effective they are. And when we're finding things like this, maybe this isn't really the threat model we need to worry about. Nerds carrying fake batarangs? Maybe not, right? But if our efforts remain untested, and yet we consider something to make us safer, and we feel safer, that is what security theater is. We as individuals, though, as employees in organizations, as participants in society, and as humans who crave and deserve this feeling of security, we must question if the efforts that we use are actually the best use of our time, the best use of our resources. And we must continually challenge our assumptions. And in order to do that, we have to be aware of some of these biases that we hold. The first is confirmation bias. And many of you maybe have heard this already, but essentially it's the tendency to interpret new evidence as confirmation of one's existing beliefs or theories already. So, for example, I believe that TSA, while annoying, keeps me safe. I go through the security screening, everyone else goes through the security screening, my airplane did not explode or get hijacked, TSA security must be working. This happens all the time, all throughout security, everywhere. It's essentially just, it can be boiled down to, I think it's secure, the bad thing didn't happen, therefore security must be working. This bias is dangerous when it comes to security, though. If you think of it like this, like the nudes you stored in the cloud don't get shared with the people you're not trying to share them with, does this mean they're secure? Does it mean they're secure from the people trying to steal them? Or do you just not know that they've already been stolen? Or maybe nobody cares to steal them in the first place. Or maybe you just haven't accidentally shared them with the wrong person yet. All of those things you'd probably consider a breach of your secure data, but you don't really know whether it's happening or not. So like if your bank account doesn't get emptied, does that mean it's secure? If a company isn't in the headlines for some data breach, does that mean they're secure? We talk about security all the time, but rarely, I think, we don't even know what it means. It's just how we feel about it. This is where red teaming comes in. A red team is designed to combat that confirmation bias by actively taking the opposing viewpoint. You have assured truths, and we're just going to try and prove the opposite. A red team actively seeks to make failures that we consider impossible or improbable to happen. It's not just hacking computers. That is our day job, is to create these black swan events so that we can drive change, so that we can educate people that security sometimes is something that we just feel. There is one little problem with doing this, though. Humans, as we all are, we don't like when that happens, and we, get ready for another definition, experience something called cognitive dissonance. This is the state of having inconsistent thoughts or beliefs or attitudes. And this is painful typically for us. When something goes wrong, when something challenges our deeply held beliefs that we have reinforced over time, we have a tendency to ignore it. We suddenly have an inconsistency between the beliefs that we've formed and the new evidence presented that doesn't match that. So if we've got years of built-up confirmation bias that a certain thing keeps us safe, and then suddenly someone presents us evidence that, no, it doesn't, we're kind of at odds, right? We need to maybe deny it, maybe push that away, maybe explain it away. It's just a freak occurrence, right? It's just nothing we could do about that, or it's just one of those things that happens. And we push that to the side so that we can continue feeling safe. So my message to you all is it's okay to fail. We should embrace failure. Failure is the very mechanism in which we learn, in which we grow, in which we test if the things we think we're doing are the right things. Too often, we're afraid to embrace a failure. We're afraid to hear that the efforts we've put into something aren't quite enough, aren't adequate. But unless we learn to get comfortable with that idea, it's going to be really hard for us to get towards a place that is a good threat model and not just security theater. Okay, now that you're all experts on behavioral psychology and a decade or two of philosophy around security, you probably came here to just see how things get hacked, right? So I want to remind you all that with great power comes great responsibility. You guys get that Spider-Man, Spatman crossover? Yeah, okay. Okay, so I hear a lot, how do you hack a password? And hack is going to be in quotes for these things because you're going to see that some of it's technical hacking stuff as you think of it, and some of it's not really. So my friend Charles is here in the audience, and he was the one that suggested I submit the talk here. And then yesterday he was like, if you want to use me as an example and talk, feel free to do that. So now he's going to be part of this presentation as well. But he did give consent for this, so it should be okay. So real quick, before we get into that, I'm going to get technical on you so that you can say, I learned some technical hacking stuff. And we're going to explain it with potatoes. So whenever you have a password somewhere, you know the password, you know what the letters are and the numbers are in your head. Now, there's this thing called hashing, and that essentially is an algorithm that goes one way that turns your password, that is potato, into a password hash, which is just scrambled letters and numbers of a fixed length that can then be verified later. Now, as you might know, it is impossible to then take a hash brown and make a potato, and hashing works the same way. You cannot take this thing and turn it back into the password. It is by its very design a one-way function. So when you go to log in somewhere, you type your password. If your password is yams rule, it gets turned into a different type of hash. Then the website or system or service that you're comparing it to compares it with the hash that it has stored. So they don't actually store the companies, and they don't store your actual password, they store the hash, and they don't know what it is. If it doesn't match, you don't get to log in. If it does match, you do. Okay. So when hackers and criminals, right, when we steal stuff, we then normally steal the hashes from somewhere. But then this thing's impossible to reverse, right? But as you might learn, nothing's impossible. So what we do is we take all the words in the dictionary, and all the words with all the numbers, and all the words with the numbers and the symbols, and then mangle them in every which way that you might, as a human, try to design your password, and we make a big list of passwords to guess, and we take those clear text passwords, and we turn them all into hash browns, and then we compare with the hashes we found. When it matches, that's how we know we found your password. So folks have been doing this for the better part of 2 decades, likely, and the amount of passwords and hashes that have been reversed is quite large. Actually, there was just a 773 million record collection called Collection 1, which is all of these things from various collections, but the hashes are already matched up for you. So they're in clear text. They're just the passwords now. 773 million is kind of a lot. Okay, so back to Charles here. If I wanted to get Charles' password, my first step would be to figure out who he is, right? So I would just go to Google, not some secret hacking tool, not the dark web. I'd go to Google and I'd put in his name and his company and facts that I can try and learn about him. I'd try and find his LinkedIn, I'd see where he lives, see where he works, I'd see where all the places that he's worked in the past. I'd try and find his Facebook account, his Twitter account. I'd try and learn as much as possible about him so that I can then try and figure out what his email is. Because knowing his email is going to be really important for me. Now, fortunately for Charles, he has a pretty common name, and that works in his favor. I find lots of different Charleses out there. If you got a really unique name, this is really easy, because if your email's out there, you're probably the only name associated with it, and there's not 10,000 other of you walking around. However, I'm going to start making searches in Google. Try and narrow it down to him, right? Like the school he went with. Maybe his university has a way to contact him, his email. Maybe facts of where he worked. He's got something else where he's got his email associated with it. I've got some searches in here where maybe he's told people on Twitter or somewhere to email me at this thing. And I'm looking for that text, for the email that's there. Where is he telling people to contact him? Maybe something's happened before and like it's on Pastebin, right? So Charles is very lucky. His exposure is quite low. His email's only been leaked out one time on the internet in one place. And if I had enough time while putting this together last night, I would have eventually found it, maybe, hopefully. Charles luckily worked with me and told me what it was so I could verify it and figure out how I could find it. But one of these searches could lead you to his personal email. So now that I've got his personal email in hand, and you never thought of your personal email as this like ticket to finding your password, but trust me, it often is. Now that I have that in hand, it's to the dark net, right? No, it's actually just to the regular internet. You don't gotta go to any super shady place. There are many, many websites where you can download all those data breaches, where all those password hashes are, or the clear text passwords associated with emails from the past. Here's a site, here's another site where you can find it, here's another site where you can find it. Here's another one. This one's free. I like this one. I tend to use this one. They got an API. I can hook it up to my other tools. It's very useful. It's very expensive, as you might imagine, to do this. $2 a day for unlimited searches. So I'm going to go on here. I'm going to pay $2. I did this last night. And then I'm going to plug in Charles's email, and then I have Charles's password from the time that it got breached. So whenever it was breached, like this one particular is from the LinkedIn breach, back then, surely he's changed it by now. Surely all of you have changed your passwords and don't use the same password that you used in 2012, right? Raise your hand if you use the same password from 2012. Oh, I didn't think anyone would go for that, but now I'll tell you what to do in a second. So you might be thinking, oh gosh, what do? I didn't know people could look up my password. Here's what you can do without having to go to any of these, while not darknet, legitimately kind of shady websites. Go to this website, not a shady website, haveibeenpwned.com. And you can put your personal email into this website, and whenever you hit pwned with a question mark, it will tell you what places your password has been breached in, or what information, wherever that email is found in data breaches. That way you know what your exposure is, and you know, like, okay, whatever password I used whenever I originally registered for this the first time is definitely compromised. Additionally, go get yourself a password manager. Our human brains kind of suck at this. They're terrible at remembering passwords. They're terrible at making unique ones. Normally what we do as humans for our passwords is we come up with a little formula to remember them. You're like, oh, I always just use this word and then the current month and then this number and then I always add 1 to it. That's really easy to guess for a computer because hackers and criminals alike, we know that you have this pattern of behavior. So whenever we find one password, it's pretty easy to just see the pattern and guess the next one. If you use a password manager, 1Password and LastPass are 2 of the industry leaders. I see them as the most popular. They're tried and tested. If you use one of these, it can generate completely unique passwords for you and remember them for you, and then you just need to remember 1Password to log into the password manager, and then you can protect that password manager with 2-factor authentication so it's extra secure. That way, if something where you log into some shady website where you use the same password that you use everywhere gets breached, not all your other stuff gets breached too because you're using unique things for each website. And I think even 1Password recently added a new feature where whenever you make a password and you store it in 1Password, it will go and look up on Have I Been Pwned and tell you if it's in there. And it will let you know, like, hey, you probably shouldn't use this one. So it's kind of nice. Okay, so that's how you hack a password, right? Simple. You might be thinking, but how do you hack my computer? Now, if we're hacking like it's 1999, the old way was basically to figure out what version of software was running on something, what version of Windows you have, what version of OS X you have, and then go on the internet and look up if there's any exploits for it. And this was like the wild, wild west of security for a while, because people would just like post stuff in random places. There was some shady forums where people would share code as exploit code. You would go download the random exploit code, read it, try and understand it, realize that you're 12 and you have no idea what you're doing. Maybe try and tweak it a little bit, and then like run the code, hoping that it works, and then you get access to the other thing, right? Kind of a mess. Fast forward a bit, post 2003, there was a tool that came out called Metasploit, which sort of like corralled all these wild west of cattle and exploits out there and put them in a single, easy to use tool. You then would just go in, configure, hey, this is the target, this is the exploit I want, this is the thing I want you to do after it's exploited, and you would type exploit, and it would exploit things for you. So in the past 2 decades, essentially things went from being kind of complicated to something that most 12-year-olds could figure out within a week of watching YouTube videos. So now, if you have something that's vulnerable because you haven't updated it with the latest security patches, 12-year-olds can just like configure this tool, point it at your thing, click, and they have access to your computer. So if everything's updated, you should still be a little worried. There's kind of 2 ways in modern environments that are actually fairly well locked down. One way is I trick you into downloading something, or you download something that's sitting out there, and it has a malicious package inside of it. And whenever you run it or install it, it installs something else on your computer. The other way is you leave your computer unattended, and I walk up with a USB drive, and I plug it in. Is this animated? No? OK. Oh, well. It's supposed to be animated. What you'll see is that with a small USB drive, it actually poses as a keyboard. And it's programmed when you plug it into the computer to start typing stuff really fast. And what it starts typing is open up your terminal window, go download this thing, install it on the computer. That way, if I distract you for 1 second while you're at the reception desk or away from your desk or something like that, or if you just left your laptop sitting at an airport, I plug this into it. Without having to sit down and crouch over your computer, it types all the commands necessary to install something that's malicious on your computer. And essentially, all this malicious stuff, what it does is it essentially takes the terminal, which is the thing that lets you type commands on your computer, and it sends it somewhere else where I can access it. So that from anywhere in the world, I can type whatever commands I want on your computer. And then that gives me access to essentially be you, do anything that you do on your computer. It's essentially like letting me sit at your computer and use it and do whatever I want with it. But my computer is in a building, and the perimeter is secure, right? You can never get to it. It's fine if I don't lock it, as long as it's within the building. Well, not really. So how we hack buildings normally is just walk in the front door, something we call piggybacking, or sometimes we call it tailgating. Essentially, it's I look for someone who has a badge for the building, and they seem to be going in, and I've got a cardboard box in my hand or some flowers for delivery or something, and you hold the door open for me and let me walk in. And this is the most common way we get into buildings whenever we can't. If people are like really suspicious and they're not letting me into buildings, or maybe there's like a man trap where there's turnstiles or something that only let one person walk through at a time, a good security mechanism, you can go online for $300. You can buy this fancy little hacker toolkit. It's called a Proxmark. And what that allows me to do is clone your badge and write it to a new badge. And I mean, that seems kind of technical and stuff, right? So I mean, for a while, this technology hasn't been super developed, and you kind of need to know a little bit, maybe even solder some stuff, plug some stuff together. It's gotten a lot better, but also it's gotten small and it's gotten cheap. So you need something like this for really high security cards, and you'll never really know the difference unless you read on your card and go look it up. But that's okay. Trust me, it's possible to do it to any of them. If you've got the kind of older ones, which most of us do, $49, you can buy one of these guys. It's about this size, fits on your keychain. It's got 4 little buttons on it. You hold one of them in on top of a card, and it sucks the card into this, and then you can replay it with this. So if you ever lose your badge, it's useful. But don't go do that, and don't tell them I told you that. Okay. So here's the essential formula for how to hack anything. Basically, security works on trust, right? Like data works on trust, information works on trust. You have to have trust with systems, and they have to trust that you are who you say you are. That's why you have a password. That's why you have two-factor authentication. It's all about verifying that you're the right person to access the things. But someone, somewhere, has to have access to the thing that you want to get to. So essentially, when I look at security, and when I look at what I need to get my access to, I see something like this. I see people, the computers they use, and the legitimate access that they have to the everything important. So all you do is pick the important thing you want to have access to and work backwards. You go, okay, who's the person that has access to this? Go on LinkedIn. Who's talking about how they have access to the servers, how their job is to be the server administrator, how their job is to edit the website, how their job is to edit the database? Whatever you want to have access to. If you want to have access to an unreleased movie, go find the person who's the producer. Go find the editor. He's got a copy of it. Figure out how to get on his computer. He'll have legitimate access to the resources you want. You win. Okay, quick little guide. What can you do to protect yourself? This is Security 101 for the modern human, right? Know what your exposure is. Go to Have I Been Pwned, type your, I promise you, it's a legitimate website. Nothing bad is going to happen to you there. It will tell you where you've had exposure, where you've been seen in previous compromises that are currently known about. And then you'll at least know about you what adversaries know about you. Then get yourself a password manager and go and change all your passwords everywhere and put it inside there. Make sure when you use a password manager, you're not just using it to remember the same password across all the different websites, right? It can generate unique, complex passwords for you that aren't going to be in any dictionary or any word list. Use that feature. If you don't use it, it doesn't really do much good other than making logging in quite faster for you. And then enable 2FA everywhere you possibly can. Essentially, 2FA, if you're not familiar, you're probably all familiar with it, but there's the idea that there's something you know, which is normally your password, and then there's something you have. Phones have become the new standard. They used to be like little tokens that would have a number on them. They've started to fall out of popularity now, and now it's your phone. Things like Duo, things like SMS. Of course, there's ways to bypass this too, but what you're doing is you're updating your threat model a little bit, and the effort you're putting in is higher, and therefore the effort for the bad guys is much higher as well. And then update, right? Don't let that 12-year-old kid out there on the internet get you with a tool that he downloaded and learned how to use last week. The security patches that get pushed out to your systems protect you from that stuff. They're annoying, you got to reboot, but Chrome saves most of your tabs anyway, so don't even worry about it. And lastly, challenge assumptions. Update your threat model. Think about this stuff. If you want to really feel secure, you can either subscribe to the theater that you're presented with and say, hey, it's someone else's job to keep me safe, I must be fine. But if you care about it, and maybe you do if you're sitting here, think about this and go take an action. Raise that effort. I'll tell you a story, right? There's no perfect for security. There is only better. And I remember, and I think this is a common parable, but I remember my dad told it to me a long, long time ago. He told me that it was a joke too. He said, there's two men out in the wilderness and a lion jumps out of the bushes and starts chasing them. And they start running. And then one man stops to start putting on his tennis shoes. And the other guy looks at him and says, what are you doing? You can't outrun a lion. And he looks back to the first man. He says, I don't have to outrun the lion. I just have to outrun you. So thanks.